Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary Shirley and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, you're listening to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. I'm Lisa Fine, and this podcast is hosted by Mary Shirley and I. You can also find us on the Corporate Compliance Insights website and webpage. Today, I am so excited to speak with Frances McLeod, who is a founding partner of Forensic Risk Alliance and head of its U.S. offices. She is an innovator and pioneer in the areas of forensic analysis, data privacy, since the inception of GDPR, and has been a monitor in many matters, including recently as the IAV monitor and historically for Ferguson City and for Weatherford, among many other SEC and DOJ monitorships. Frances and FRA are also focusing a lot on the area of sanctions as of late. We have so much to cover today. I'm so thrilled that you're here. And Frances, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into forensics, and about founding and growing FRA?
Of course, and hi, Lisa. I'm so glad to be here. I actually started off not as an accountant, but in investment banking in London and subsequently in the Far East, focused on M&A and corporate finance. And I was then joined an investigations boutique to do M&A for them, so to do a sort of roll-up. And given that it took a while to identify appropriate targets, I ended up being pulled into some investigative work because of my language skills, because I speak French, German, and Chinese. And so bit by bit, I cut my teeth on doing a number of investigations, anti-money laundering, usually banking related. And then I got headhunted to be part of the team undertaking the Swiss bank Nazi gold, Holocaust era investigations, really into dormant assets, and moved to Switzerland to do that. And that's really the genesis of FRA, because it was on that project that I met my co-founding partner, Greg Mason, who was a database architect and data analytics guy. And my background was in banking, in investigations and so on. And we worked out that by working collaboratively around the design of the database that was supposed to help identify dormant accounts, it would help to have someone who understood how a Swiss bank worked, who had the relevant language skills, who could help identify appropriate data sets. And so as we worked together over those 2.5 years, we saw how well having an integrated team with investigations and sort of technical expertise, as well as data analytics, worked. And we thought that it would be a really great idea to offer this sort of combined offering to clients in the marketplace. And so we decided, as the project drew to a close, to set up our own company. And along the journey, we brought on board my brother, Toby Duffy, who runs our European offices and is London-based, who was a project finance banker and had significant financial modelling skills. So we thought between the three of our skill sets and our sort of entrepreneurial spirit, it would be an idea to set something up that we could offer services that were very technology driven as well to the market as a whole. So from the Holocaust restitution work, which we first picked up when we founded, we then moved more into the wider space. So from the mid to early 2000s into the anti-corruption arena. And now we help clients manage a wide range of white collar and regulatory compliance challenges. You know, as you mentioned, sanctions, financial crime. Recently, you mentioned the IAV monitorship, which is Dieselgate related. And all of this, of course, comes together, brings together the need to also be able to address data privacy and transfer issues, what I call the geopolitics of data, which is increasingly complicated. So we also advise and leverage our expertise in that area.
I'm going to ask you about that as you're talking about the politics of data and all of the other things that you're doing. You've worked in so many different areas, but one of the ways that you've worked through that common theme was things being fit for purpose. We talked about that a lot, and tailoring a program, whether it is data or in a monitorship. How do you develop your approach, and how do you come up with what you think is a common theme?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I'm sure many of the people listening who are struggling with compliance budgets are probably thinking about the same thing. I mean, harking back to how we founded and what our ethos was from the beginning when we were very small, we were always thinking about how do we provide client-centric solutions that are fit for purpose, and how can we take what resources available and allocate that resource on behalf of the client to make sure that they are addressing compliance concerns and other risks. So we, historically had always relied heavily on technology to help make up for where we were lacking in terms of headcount. Today, that's less of an issue with 230 strong. But we basically focus on marrying data governance, data analytics, and forensic accounting, and positioning those skill sets to help provide end-to-end solutions for our clients. And obviously what the regulators take into consideration, and I know that you'll be very sensitive to this too, is that fit for purpose solution addressing specific risks that corporate is facing? So what we do is, every situation to a degree is unique, but we are able to leverage industry expertise. For example, we've done an enormous amount of work in the oil and gas industry, so we're very sensitive to where their compliance risks lie. And I think we're able to relatively quickly cut to the chase in helping our clients calibrate what they need to do to identify and mitigate risk and put controls in place. But equally, we always customize our solutions because one company might have a more mature compliance program that's already got real-time ongoing monitoring and testing going on. Another may be more in its infancy or have more resource constraints. So there we would focus more on what controls do you already have in place or how can those be enhanced to help mitigate risk. So maybe it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about some cases where we've tailored approach to the specific issues at hand. And you may have heard that we were involved in the Airbus very, very large scale multi-jurisdictional investigation around anti-corruption issues, which involved French, British and US authorities, as well as other bodies in different countries where Airbus had historical issues. And there we had to look at data transfer and privacy laws, because Airbus is obviously a French company with sites in Spain and in Germany and France and globally. We also had to find a way to coordinate responses to respond to the regulators that might have different areas of focus, and how could we do that in a way that helped furnish the forensic accounting information and also the risk mapping exercise we've done in a way that meshed with the council's desires to be able to negotiate almost simultaneously with the regulators. And then obviously, given the size of Airbus as an organisation, an enormous volume of data and custodians across jurisdictions. So how could we really help the lawyers who were doing the document review and assessing case by case where the issues may have lain, really get to the heart of the matter, which is why we also, on the sort of data governance side of that project, relied quite heavily on continuous active learning, so which is a type of quasi AI which helps group and cluster like information together, but also helps as the algorithms are being applied, they get smarter and smarter as you group like interesting documents together. So that was very much had to be a fit for purpose solution to a massive multi-jurisdictional investigation. Then when you're looking at a company like Weatherford, where we were part of the team under a hybrid monitorship, which was only 18 months, there you were dealing with a relatively highly sophisticated company in the oil and gas business, and they had invested an enormous amount of money in building up a really impressive compliance team, to include having their own forensic accountants on the team that were doing testing and monitoring. But when we arrived at Weatherford, there was still a deal that could be improved. And I'm proud to say, when we arrived, they were slightly offended that they had a monitor, and particularly when they'd invested in this very, very impressive and experienced compliance team. I think we came in with a fresh pair of eyes and were able to very quickly and efficiently help them improve their monitoring and testing, help them make more robust their testing of internal compliance controls. We even helped develop some algorithms that they could run across data sets that they were querying. And I think there it was a lighter touch, but a very targeted approach that was fit for purpose there, given how much they'd already invested. And then just finally touching on the project that I've personally found sort of most gratifying in recent years is the IAV monitorship, where I'm currently serving as the US DOJ appointed compliance monitor. And IAV is a German engineering company that was implicated in the Dieselgate emissions scandal. So they essentially were working for VW, developing software and certain of their employees were involved in assisting the creation of the defeat device that was at the center of the fraud. And obviously, I'm not an automotive engineer. I have some familiarity with environmental regulation, but I'm not an environmental regulatory lawyer. But I'm very proud to say that we came in with our sort of decades of experience looking at compliance programs, all of which are obviously, for the most part, driven by needing to comply with regulations and having to have in place anti-fraud controls. So it's been really intellectually challenging. But I think because we came in with such a strong testing and monitoring environment experience, and also because we have so much experience at looking at what an effective control looks like, we've been able to develop some really good lenses, I think, through which to help the company view its obligations, but also to really be able to help distill how does one address regulatory compliance, particularly in an environment which could be which is frequently changing. Obviously the scandal du jour is emissions related, but obviously that is going to be a dying issue in the automotive industry. But they need to sort of look at how do they comply with, new emission standards, but equally, what are they going to do when they get involved in autonomous vehicles and, compliance and regulatory compliance around that is going to evolve. So we've been very much focused on looking at what the specific risks lie, looking at how those risks evolve and how to sensitize the compliance team to how to mitigate risks that may still be evolving, and also how to bring into place training of all of these engineers that are going to be making calls, obviously still relying on their compliance team around technical compliance as and when they're doing essentially software development. So a lot of the projects involved our knowledge of how does software development change management occur, what kind of controls can you put in place, how do you train highly technical people to identify regulatory and compliance risk? How do you marry up technicians and technical compliance experts with compliance experts? So it's been absolutely fascinating, but I'm proud to say, obviously, it's still ongoing, that we've been able to leverage our historical experience around controls and testing and monitoring and the development of sustainable compliance programs in order to evaluate where the company is and where it needs to go.
Interesting about that is the way that you have all of these different competing priorities. And as you've been talking about all of the different things and as evolving through that, it's not fit for purpose is important. It's also, I remember talking about data privacy. You may have 80 problems, but only 8 of them are the ones that you really need to address and to focus. And it sounds like a lot of what you're doing through the analytics and through the process is helping do that as well. Because I do think in a lot of these situations, no matter how sophisticated the organization or the individuals are, it can start out as pretty overwhelming. We have to fix everything. Where do we start? And sometimes, outside advisors may, give you all the problems without helping to prioritize. It sounds like one of the things to you that's key in your fit for purpose and approach development.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely spot on, because it's a question of triage in all things and a question of priority and resource. And I think it's been really heartening to see, the evolution too in dealings with the DOJ and the SEC and some of the other bodies that we deal with as they get more and more experience, as they bring more and more cases, as these settlements occur, as these monitorships are awarded, and obviously one's having a dialogue with them as you're going through the monitorship journey as well, is there is an awareness there of perfection is nigh on impossible, but how do you prioritize? What's the appropriate resource to allocate? And what, as you say, is the risk that is of paramount importance that needs to be addressed? And what's that sort of hierarchy of risk? And how do you address that in an appropriate fashion? And I think I know that you will have the same experience in your career as well, is that, compliance officers are constantly having new responsibilities plunked on their plate and new risks they have to mitigate. And that triage piece is always just such an important part in terms of, where do you focus your attention and what do you need to shore up as a priority versus what can you live with for now?
You were talking earlier a bit about artificial intelligence or a version of AI. I think that for me is one of the bigger issues that's going to be coming out lately. And this is a huge topic, but from a practical standpoint, if you we're going to talk about 2 or 3 things that for us as compliance professionals or compliance officers to keep in mind. What would you say that those would be as we go into this strange world?
I agree. I mean, I think you will all be, many of you already are on some level probably using some element of AI. But I think it's going to be part of all of our lives in the compliance arena, no matter how big or small the organization is. And just to touch back on what I was saying before, in terms of expectations for compliance officers, they have changed rapidly over the past, I'd say, 10 years or so due to the rapidly shifting data and technology landscape. So, your remit as a compliance officer, I think, is expanding all the time as there are new developments and risks. And so you've probably now got a high risk of, data breach and privacy concerns being part of your remit and how to address those. Well, certainly as a chief compliance officer, you're bound to have somebody in your team that's looking at that and probably having interplay with your IT security and obviously the legal department around these. So to my mind, some of the best uses of AI that we're seeing currently, and we expect to see more of, are around proactive compliance. And a good example of that is, the ability to proactively monitor cybersecurity threats and data manipulation. There's some really cool AI software out there called Security Rating Service, and they basically do real-time monitoring of vendors and partners' security by using algorithms and predictive analytics to turn millions of security data inputs into prioritized list of security factors and issues of concern. So, a vast majority of data breaches are from third parties penetrating, your environment. So this is kind of a way of alerting that based on being able to chunk through all of these alerts and prioritize the ones that are pose the greatest risk. Obviously, the other area, and we touched again on the sanctions thing, is AI programs that are able to proactively identify legal breaches and self-reporting obligations to the relevant authorities. And obviously, there are OFAC lists, and the banks and many other organisations have to go through the matching processes that go to sanctions breaches and the need to report. But that being said, anything that can help reduce false positives, reduce costs, identify human error is going to be incredibly valuable and help save costs as well, and provide more accurate reporting and increase efficiency. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of investment by the software development companies that are out there looking at compliance ware to try and help some of these issues, particularly around the sort of thorny issue of sanctions, which can generate a lot of false positives, which require manual intervention. I think we're going to see that become more and more efficient. So I think that those two areas off the top of my head are really valuable. And the other piece about AI as well is obviously it can help bring forward the self-reporting piece, and be part of, if you've got an effective AI piece of software running across your systems. That can be part of a defense argument in terms of your ability or your willingness and your ability to identify breaches or issues that need to be addressed, as quickly as possible, and allowing you to proactively report and monitor potential breaches. The regulators do take that into consideration. So again, I think AI can help. AI and machine learning can really help that ability to assess if and when and how to self-report and to be able to be part of your sort of defense arguments around what you were trying to do to be as compliant as you could.
Yeah, that's a great thought, and it's a great part of it. Changing the topic a little bit, and it's something that I saw that you worked on that and talked about that was really, really interesting to me, is working on the City of Ferguson monitorship in the United States. I don't know what you can or can't talk about that case, but one of the things you talked about there was the importance and the use of data analytics and the recognition of individuals in the community of the importance of that data.
Yeah, and this is, I think it's another example of how it's back to your fit for purpose, but also about the power of data analytics being leveraged in a variety of different scenarios. And obviously, Ferguson was, around the unlawful conduct that the police department and the municipal court had undertaken in essentially discriminating against and extorting fines from the community, predominantly African American community. And so I was part of the team that was asked to be part of the independent monitor team, which was under the leadership of Clark Urban at Squire Patton Boggs. And we were supposed to be overseeing the implementation of reforms meant to promote effective policing and to help really bridge the gap and foster greater trust between police officers and the community there. And what we were charged with doing was taking the police data and the court data and analysing how it had been abused, essentially, and where controls could be put into place to ensure that officers were recording information appropriately, and equally that the court system was not using that data to profile and essentially, be able to target sectors of the community. So we learned a lot about, how a squad car is basically a computer and how that feeds into the systems, how reports are filed, which is all done electronically, and equally about court data as well. One of the challenges of it, frankly, and one of the frustrations was a lot of the data was incomplete or had been manipulated. So obviously there was a data integrity issue there as well. And unfortunately, due to the timing of the monitorship, we ended up, along with the entire team, resigning from it because with the change in administration and the Trump administration coming in and a lack of focus on these type of human rights matters being brought by DOJ, it sort of ground to a halt and cooperation was not as it had been. So we felt that we had to withdraw from it. But what it did do from a sort of personal perspective is obviously there was a huge public service element. It allowed us to really understand some of the challenges the community faces when the police and the court system go rogue. And it brought us as a firm back nearly full circle to sort of the human rights redress work that we took when we first founded. And the other thing that was the best takeaway for me was as part of the pitch to be awarded the monitorship. We were competing with a variety of different teams, all of mixed discipline. And part of that was being interviewed by the community and having community representatives and just anybody who lived in Ferguson have the ability to ask questions of the potential monitor team. And I perhaps rather naively thought, well, no one's going to ask me a question because I'm the weird data person and they're not going to really care about data analytics. They're going to care about the people who have an experience of how to police communities effectively. They're going to want to hear from people who understand, how courts should be run. They're going to want to understand, have all of this police department and court system expertise. And the very first question was asked by this elderly lady was, okay, I want to hear from the data lady, because we know that the data can give us some answers that people might not want to give us. And it made me, obviously, because I'm a data analytics fan, made me very happy to see that regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the nature of the monitorship, that the victims within that community had faith that on some level data analytics would be able to provide them with some truths that maybe they couldn't get to in another way. And we were very focused on trying to get to the crux of that, and very focused on working out how we could leverage data to help build in controls and enforce compliance of a system that had become corrupted.
Yeah, I love that story. I mean, I just love that idea, because that is really, numbers and data can't lie in the same way as others might. But I just think it's just kind of amazing and important, the recognition of it, and the recognition in a situation that is so human rights focused. So I just thought that is really fascinating, and also how critically important it was there and in the other things that we talked about. So I have one last some questions for you about the ethics and compliance community. It has a lot of women, but there are fewer women in the data analytics and forensic risk areas. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced, and then why you think it's such a great area to work in.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I've been lucky to have found some other great women in this space that have been amazingly collegiate and helpful. But starting out as a woman in investment banking in the late 80s, I was used to being the only woman in the room 100% of the time. I started out in a department of 150 professionals, of which 4 were women. And so, I was used to, as I said, being the only woman in the room. I was used to sometimes having clients that were skeptical about my ability to be able to give them advice. It certainly helps you develop a thicker hide. And I think, in that era also, it was a question of trying to sort of blend in rather than, owning the fact that you were diverse, you did have a different viewpoint, that you were as technically skilled as the men, and that you were just as interested in forensics and data analytics. But I think, one of the great things about now is I think people are very much open to having a sort of female-centric approach and understanding that we are, have our own styles, our own approaches, but that we are just as technically competent, and that we, are just as good data jockeys. We're just as good at looking at risk and mitigating risk and working out how controls can work and so on. So, I think it's been a journey. I do my best, and I'm very committed to, within FRA and beyond, to helping encourage women to see why this is such a great space. And we actually have a number of initiatives where we send out some of our more junior folks to talk in, high schools, and in also to lawyers and people who are maybe not so data centric about what it is we do and why we do it and why it's interesting, and sort of the powerful elements of it, so that they can, if they don't even do it themselves, they can at least understand how to leverage it going forward. And I think the great thing about looking at this field now is we're seeing more and more women entering the field and rising to leadership positions. And I think part of that trend is, and I think you Lisa, and many of the others are part of the movement in compliance to be collegiate, to support one another, and that the recognition of the need to have forensics and data analytics as part of that compliance environment means that, you, as much as people who are the full-on geeks, are around to help develop other women and bring them up through the ranks in these fields, in these areas. And, I'm really passionate about mentoring and ensuring their pathways to success for the talented women in our team. We proactively, try and recruit more women, and we spend a lot of time investing in their training, in giving them exposure to different types of projects, to helping them see the broader application of what they do, which is wonderful given the variety of different projects we get to work on. So really giving them exposure to a wide variety of different challenges, some of which may be very IT intensive, some of other which may be much more around problem solving and how can you leverage IT and an understanding of controls to do that. And then, on the data governance side, which we touched on a little bit, which is around the sort of the data transfer and data privacy piece, I'm really proud to say that our team is pretty unique because we've got entirely female leadership, myself and my co-head Britt Enderman, and we're very focused on giving women opportunities to develop their technical skills and forging career paths for them in technology. And we're also really heavily female-led on the forensic accounting side. And it's been really a revelation over the past few years to hear about the excitement that our clients express when they discover we're a women-led team, because they're trying to diversify their own teams. They have they have mandates to demonstrate diversity in who they engage as their advisors. So it feels much more supportive and collaborative, but also not just from other women, but from the industry as a whole around wanting to see more women in this space, and also really appreciating the value around forensics and data analytics that can be brought in a compliance context.
And one of the other things that I noticed too about your team is not only are you have you so many women on your website and others, but you all very much have a commitment to diversity as a whole. And that is one thing that while we in podcasting in the community are supportive of women, and that's sort of our core audience, for us just to be able to see that and to be able to look and see that that's a commitment is also a really impressive and appreciated thing. having looked at your website and seeing that you have committed to lots of different areas in diversity too, and growth in an area that isn't traditionally as diverse.
Yeah, and it's something we're very focused on. And to be honest, it's been a recruitment tool, because I think a lot of people are looking for that. And a lot of our clients too, because I mean, in the space that we're in the same as you, Lisa, we operate all over the world in all kinds of different environments. And the more that we can look as diverse and, as the whole world does, the better. I think it brings, cultural sensitivity. It brings an ability to be compassionate about issues and problems, which our clients face, and which we, it's something that we are incredibly committed to. And I'm very excited. We launched a diversity and inclusion initiative a few months ago, and engaging in a lot of pro bono work in that space. And it's the people in the firm bring the same rigor and passion and really wonderful quality of work to that initiative than they do to, all of their professional endeavors. So I really feel that we're, as a firm, collectively incredibly engaged on delivering on all fronts on the diversity side. And it's something we remain committed to.
I just wanted to also say before we close out, thank you so much for taking the time with me. It's one of the best parts of the podcast is getting to meet interesting women in all different parts of the field. Also someone like you. And I just have to ask, how many languages do you now speak before we leave the podcast? Because I think last time I read you were learning Icelandic. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but
that is still the case. And it's a bit of a cheat because it's similar to German, although the pronunciation is really difficult and they speak really hard. So I'm very much nascent on that, but I speak French, German, English, and Chinese, and a little bit of Bahasa Indonesia. Yeah.
Wow. I just, that's amazing. And I just wanted to again say how much I appreciate your time, and thank you so much. And on behalf of Mary and me and the Compliance Podcast Network, thanks so much for joining us on Great Women in Compliance.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.